As a psychologist working with parents, you can never be truly neutral because you are, of course, the child of your parents, and many of you are a parent yourself. It's different than dealing with depressive or schizophrenic patients. In those cases, you haven't necessarily had the same experience as yourself or had someone close to you implicated. With parenting, however, it's very different since we all have a personal experience of parenting, either from being parented by our own parents or through parenting our own children. Because of this, it's necessary to be able to detach yourself from your own experience. The theoretical frameworks and the models that conceptualize the experience of parents are there to help us approach the problems related to parenting in a professional way, with a certain distance, but still with empathy and warmth. In the case of parental burnout, our position as a psychologist plays a crucial role. Since most cultures view parenthood as something with very positive connotations, it can make it very difficult to admit suffering as a parent. You have only to remember the congratulatory cards for new babies to know that the social expectations of parenthood are decidedly positive. There's an expectation that being or becoming a parent is accompanied by pride, happiness, joy, but not by boredom, despair, sadness, or annoyance. Therefore, because of this phenomenon of social desirability, parents who feel these more negative emotions about their parenting role are very reluctant to confide in others. It's very complicated to admit it to their spouse, their friends, their relatives, and it's very complicated for them to seek out help from a professional about feeling burned out or about having lost pleasure in the context of parenting. For a very long time, these parents put on a brave face and they try not to let their suffering show. And they generally feel very alone, thinking that no one can understand what they are feeling without judging them. Their personal history can further complicate matters. Imagine, for example, a parent who has finally had children after a long journey of medically assisted procreation. They have repeatedly confided to those around them about their unfulfilled desire to become a parent. They have suffered failures in their attempts to procreate, and now they are finally a parent. How can they complain? How can they suffer from a parenting role that they have so longed for? It's therefore easy to imagine that when parents take the step of consulting and confiding in others, they feel extremely guilty and ashamed. And it's important to remember that shame is one of the most difficult emotions to share. The process is therefore always costly for the parent. And it is also very threatening to the patient's identity. We will see in the section on identity work, parental identity is an important part of the self. Anything that can threaten it is always very destabilizing for the patient. It is indeed the whole image of oneself as a parent and as a person that is affected. Since it takes time to feel comfortable disclosing their pain, by the time the parent brings it up in a counseling session, their suffering is usually already long-standing. We can hope that lifting the taboo around parental burnout will gradually improve the situation and allow suffering parents to come and meet with trained professionals within a shorter timeline. You can now see how what the burned out parent needs is to admit their suffering in front of someone who will not judge, who is able to understand and recognize it, as you were trained to do in Module 1 of this training. The attitude of the professional is therefore very important. Their congruence, for example, which you say really resonates with me, their empathy, their unconditional positive regard towards a patient whose self-image is affected. These are all essential ingredients to form a strong therapeutic alliance that can allow the parent to find a space where they can share what they are going through. Attitudes of congruence, unconditional positive regard, and empathy, these can all be difficult to employ in certain situations, however. Imagine that a parent confides to us that they have neglected or harmed their children. How can we not be upset or affected? How can we adopt an appropriate and positive attitude in our verbal and nonverbal communication? Perhaps we should always start by remembering that if the patient is in therapy, then they are aware that they need help, and they have made the effort to find that help. Also remember that it is complicated to judge someone if we are not experiencing their situation. With the same personality, the same stressors, and the same resources in our parental balance, we might have acted in the same way. As we discussed in the video on the consequences of parental burnout, the role of the psychologist is not only to ensure that parents know why they're in therapy, so to prevent harm to themselves and to their children, but also to validate that they are in therapy to get help and to assure them that we can help them. So let's see now how an expert in person-centered therapy talks about this clinical positioning in relation to burned out parents.